Hollywood created a very specific image of the Old West prostitute. The classic picture is always the same: the so-called soiled dove with a kind heart, a bright red dress, an easy smile, and a life filled with excitement and freedom. But when historians dug into real records, doctors' journals, court documents, social worker reports, and personal letters written by the women themselves, they uncovered a completely different reality. This is the version of the story Hollywood rarely tells. Number 1. Most entered the trade at 16 or 17 years old, not in their mid-20s. Forget the image presented in movies. Admission records from brothels operating in mining towns across Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona between 1870 and 1890 reveal something very different. Most women entered prostitution between the ages of 15 and 18. In other words, many were still teenagers. For many, it was the first time they had ever been away from home. The reasons appear again and again throughout surviving documents. Some were escaping arranged marriages arranged by families struggling with poverty. Others were orphaned and had nowhere else to go. Some traveled west alone after hearing promises of jobs that simply did not exist. Then there were recruiters. Madams often waited at train stations, approaching young women who had just arrived in town. They offered positions as seamstresses, cooks, or housemaids. The promises sounded respectable. The reality was something else entirely. That Hollywood image of a mature woman confidently choosing this life on her own terms is mostly fiction. The records paint a much darker picture. Many were simply young girls with no safe place left to turn. Number 2. The debt was designed to last forever. Imagine working every day of your life while somehow owing more money at the end of each month than you did at the beginning. In many Old West brothels, the strongest chain wasn't made of steel. It was made of numbers written in a ledger. The system was simple. The madam paid for a girl's train ticket and immediately charged it to her account. Then came the dress she was required to wear, the room, the meals, the laundry, the so-called protection fees. Every expense was added to the list. The debt started high by design. In many cases, it was structured so that weeks of work barely covered the interest. And there was always another charge waiting. A doctor's appointment. A penalty for refusing a customer. Unexpected fees. Administrative costs. The balance never seemed to shrink. It only grew. Court records from San Francisco during the 1880s reveal women who spent years working without ever eliminating the debt they incurred on their first day. Trying to leave rarely solved the problem. Leaving while still owing money was treated as running away from a contract. In reality, it created a system that trapped women almost indefinitely. It looked legal on paper. But for many, it felt like slavery under a different name. Number 3. Prostitution paid more than almost any job available, but most of the money never stayed with the women earning it. Picture America in 1880. A woman without a husband or family support had very limited ways to survive. Domestic servants often earned between $3 and $5 a week. Factory workers earned roughly the same. School teachers could make slightly more, sometimes $6 to $12, but usually only if they remained unmarried. Now compare that to prostitution in a booming mining town. A prostitute could generate $20 to $40 a week. Sometimes even more. On paper, it looked like a fortune. 4 to 8 times what many other women earned. But that impressive income came with a catch. The madam collected rent. She took a percentage of earnings. She charged for clothing. She charged for meals. She charged for nearly everything. By the end of the month, many women who had technically earned large sums of money found themselves living little better than household servants. The wealth was real. The profits existed. They simply flowed upward to the brothel owner instead of the women producing them. And that is the detail most popular stories leave out. If revelations like these surprise you, make sure to subscribe. Every week we uncover the hidden side of history, the stories that rarely make it into textbooks, movies, or documentaries. Number 4. Where a woman worked often determined how long she survived. Hollywood usually focuses on the elegant side of the business. The reality was far more divided. At the top were the parlor houses. These establishments featured furnished reception rooms, piano music, quality drinks, and carefully screened customers. Women there generally had better clothing, better meals, and at least some level of protection. This was the profitable and respectable-looking side of the industry. But beneath it existed another world entirely. The cribs. These were tiny wooden rooms, often no larger than 6 by 9 feet, lined up along streets known simply as the line. Women worked exhausting shifts that could stretch from 12 to 16 hours a day. Customers came and went constantly. Rest was rare. Privacy barely existed. and physical health often collapsed within months. Here is the part rarely shown in movies. Most women were not working in luxurious parlor houses. Most were in the cribs. The glamorous establishments were the exception, not the rule. Hollywood took the smallest and most attractive corner of the industry and presented it as the entire story. The truth looked very different. Those were 4 facts about how the system operated. The next facts reveal what that system did to the women trapped inside it. Number 9, the point of no return. One fact about the Old West rarely gets discussed. Once a woman entered that world, escaping it was far harder than most people imagine. Society judged her harshly, yet it was that same society that blocked nearly every path out. Many respectable hotels refused to rent rooms to former prostitutes. Certain churches would not welcome them. Marrying a man with a respected reputation was extremely difficult. Even when women tried to find ordinary jobs in stores, schools, or private homes, employers demanded references that nobody wanted to provide. Reports from reform organizations reveal a heartbreaking pattern. Many women genuinely attempted to start over. Yet communities often spread rumors, refused opportunities, and treated them as permanent outsiders. With no income and nowhere to turn, many eventually found themselves returning to the very life they wanted to leave behind. The harsh reality was simple. The people who condemned them were often the same people making sure they could never move on. Number 10, children born inside the system. Consider what life looked like for a child born in a frontier brothel. Many entered the world without official records, legal recognition, or family support. Their future was often decided before they could even walk. Most orphanages of the era were operated by religious institutions, and many refused to accept children connected to prostitution. Without relatives willing to help, these children frequently grew up inside the same buildings where they were born. Social service records from San Francisco during the late 19th century describe a disturbing cycle. Many girls received little education and rarely experienced life outside the brothel. By their early teenage years, some were already being pushed into work by the same people who had controlled their mothers. The pattern repeated itself generation after generation. These children existed on the margins of society, largely ignored by the legal system and overlooked by the people who could have helped them. For many, there was no rescue, no intervention, and no second chance. Number 11, the women who controlled the business. In the Old West, one of the few ways to gain wealth within the industry was to become a madam. Women who owned brothels and managed the debts of others sometimes accumulated significant money and influence. Yet success stories were far less common than many people believe. Pearl de Verre, the famous owner of the old homestead in Cripple Creek, Colorado, lived a life that appeared glamorous. She wore expensive clothing and charged prices that few people could afford. To outsiders, she seemed incredibly wealthy. But when she died in 1887, people discovered a different reality. There was barely enough money available to cover funeral expenses, and customers helped pay for her burial. Others achieved better results. Dora Dufran of Deadwood invested her earnings into property and additional businesses, eventually building substantial wealth. These contrasting stories reveal how the system worked. A few individuals rose to the top, but most profits flowed upward while the majority continued struggling at the bottom. Number 12, how the red light district got its name. Have you ever wondered where the phrase red light district originated? One popular explanation traces it back to the railroad era. During the late 19th century, railroad workers commonly carried red signal lanterns as part of their equipment. When trains stopped in frontier towns, crew members often visited brothels near the station. According to the story, they hung their red lanterns outside so co-workers could quickly locate them if the train needed to depart. Over time, entire streets became associated with the glow of red lights. Travelers arriving after dark immediately understood what kind of businesses operated there. Historians still debate whether this account is completely accurate. However, there is no debate about the railroad's enormous influence on American culture. Even today, the phrase remains part of everyday language. Number 13. Violence was part of daily life. Imagine being assaulted and knowing that reporting the crime would accomplish almost nothing. For many prostitutes in frontier towns, that was reality. When violence occurred, their testimony often carried little weight in court. Authorities frequently dismissed their statements because of their profession and reputation. The situation became even worse when local law enforcement maintained close relationships with brothels. Some officers were customers themselves. Investigating assaults was rarely a priority. Brothel owners also had reasons to stay silent. Drawing attention to violence could damage business and attract unwanted scrutiny. As a result, beatings, serious injuries, and other forms of abuse became routine. Medical records from the period reveal recurring patterns of trauma that suggest many women suffered repeated violence over long periods. The system offered almost no protection and very little justice. Number 14. Medical inspections that targeted only women. Beginning in the 1870s, several cities attempted to regulate prostitution through licensing systems that required medical examinations. St. Louis became one of the most notable examples. Registered prostitutes were required to undergo regular inspections conducted by city physicians. The women themselves paid the fees. The examinations were invasive, uncomfortable, and often humiliating. Refusing to participate could mean losing the ability to work entirely. Yet one detail stands out above all others. The customers faced no comparable requirements. The men creating the demand escaped scrutiny while the women carried the burden of regulation. Officials treated female bodies as something to be monitored and controlled, while male responsibility remained largely absent from the conversation. That imbalance would influence public policy for decades. Number 15. Survival was rare. Popular culture loved stories about women who escaped poverty, found love, and built better lives after working in Old West brothels. Such cases existed, but they were uncommon. Historical records paint a far darker picture. Many women died before reaching middle age. Disease, addiction, violence, and extreme hardship ended countless lives long before 40. Documents from mining towns describe orphan children whose mothers never lived long enough to raise them. Social workers recorded cases of sick women being removed from brothels once they could no longer generate income. Without money, housing, or support, many faced desperate circumstances. The few success stories became famous precisely because they were unusual. Hollywood later turned those exceptions into the standard narrative, creating an image that rarely reflected reality. Number 16. The diaries that tell a different story. Some of the most powerful evidence from the Old West comes directly from the women themselves. Letters and diaries preserved by missionaries and charitable organizations provide a rare glimpse into their daily lives. These writings describe loneliness, homesickness, and families left behind. They speak of physical suffering that alcohol and narcotics could only temporarily numb. They reveal humiliation, fear, and exhaustion.
That
Yet
many
they
of
also
these
reveal
girls had never.
resilience. Many women supported one another, formed friendships, shared resources, and created small networks of protection inside a system designed to isolate them. Their words challenged the myths created by popular culture. The familiar image of the carefree frontier prostitute with freedom and independence does not match what many of these women experienced. Instead, the records describe lives shaped by poverty, debt, illness, and limited choices. A handful escaped. Most never did. The least history can do is remember their stories as they were actually lived, not as they were later imagined.